reboots my brain. Hello and welcome, Anna Smith
Hi.
Clark. How are you doing?
All right. Yeah.
Uh,
Yes. Right.
it's very lovely to have you here. So we're going to be talking today about you and your work,
Yeah.
um, and I can't wait to find out all about it, as I'm sure our readers will as well. So I know many of them will know your work anyway. Obviously, I'll include the bio and all that so they can read up on you, find your work. Maybe we'll feature some of your covers as well, which is always nice. Um, so you'll get a good plug. Not that you really need it, but like it's all good, isn't it? It's all oxygen. What they call it, a signal boost. Um,
Yes.
every writer needs a good signal boost. So to start with, then here's a nice warm-up question. First of all, tell me about your very unusual shoes. I'm fascinated
Oh,
to hear about those.
yeah. No, I've always loved really, really ridiculous high heel shoes, and yeah, partly I think because I've got a bit of a complex about my height, but no, I just love ridiculously fancy shoes. So I just seem to wear they're like absurdly kind of high heeled shoes. I've got this, I think the most famous pair are this amazing pair that they're cantilevered, so they don't actually have a heel. They're like high heels. If you imagine a pair of high heels with a high heel cut off, but they're
Wow,
cantilevered, so it's kind of they're sort of yeah, they're cantilevered, so you walk around in them as if you're walking on a heel, but you're not. You're
wow.
walking
They sound
gap.
painful. Are they
I
painful?
mean, actually, not that bad.
Okay.
I mean, because I have been wearing high heels since I was 16, so I'm just
Mm,
used to it. Like most things in life,
mm,
if you wear it enough,
yeah.
you're used to it, and it's just I mean, yeah, they're not. People always say, "Aren't you uncomfortable?" I mean, like, well, no, I wouldn't want to run a marathon in these shoes, obviously. I don't
Mm,
wear them when I'm like kind of out hiking, but
mm,
for cons and parties and events and things,
mm.
it's just not. It's nice to dress up. It's
Oh, totally. Well, I love uh, footwear. I come from a shoe town, originally Northampton. Actually, my mum worked for Church's Shoes. Northampton's the home of kinky boots. So
it's the
there
home,
you go.
and
So
yeah, you've got a shoe museum, haven't you? There,
yeah,
yeah.
with Elton John's massive like shoes in and everything like that. And it used to be where DMs were made. So I always used to wear DMs, to remind me of where I came from. But I think dressing up is for me also a key part of engaging with fantasy in a very visceral, embodied way. I mean, you have a distinctive look. How important do you think that is for you to like, to almost like model your fantasy, to
No, yeah,
embody it?
thank you. Because yeah, no, that is kind of. I mean, actually, I have a. So my last book was called A Sword of Bronze and Ashes, and I have a bronze dress, which I tend to wear in relation to that book. And yeah, and I have shoes that I link to different books. And yeah, no, I mean, it's not just so. I mean, writing and reading fantasy for me isn't just a thing I do because I like writing and reading. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it is that kind of sense of it's my whole life. I
Yes.
like to dress up to look kind of absurdly fantastical because yeah, I mean, yeah, I like beautiful things and fantastical things. So I kind of want to make myself, yeah, it's dressed like that and try and
Well, it
look, yes, because it's the whole thing. It's like living in a slightly more magical world.
absolutely. It's almost like a magical way of thinking. It's bringing fantasy into the mundane. It's you know a way of blending the worlds, re-enchanting the everyday. Um, so yeah, I think it's a part of it. I mean, obviously cosplay is massive in fandom, but also role playing. So that leads me to my next question because I noticed you used to be a keen player of D&D, as was I.
Yeah.
Um, I was that geeky nerd as a kid who found other geeky nerds to play with, and that made all the difference. It saved me, I tell you, from the society I was living in at the time and escaped from that world. So it was what really got me into writing through drafting scenarios, world building, and the adrenaline rush of live multi-directional narrative. I think I was a bit too much of a control freak though, because I got too much into the writing and the description, and I got kind of annoyed when the characters didn't do what I wanted them to do. Yeah, I was like the kind of emperor, tyrant, god being, so probably not the best games master, but it certainly gave me that hit of narrative, which I've had ever since. But did it inspire or influence you in any way as a writer?
Actually, I think in some ways it was probably the opposite. So, so I never DM'd. I only ever played, and I'd never once
Interesting.
DM because I didn't. Well, I played. So I played it obsessively at university. I had this absolutely wonderful year at university where I was studying. So my first degree was in classics. So I was studying the Iliad and Alexander the Great, and then we do
Mm.
nothing but role playing. We just do D&D all the time, and we were. I mean, we spent more time in character in the house we were in than we did kind of just being like, we just role played all the time, almost every evening. And when we weren't I mean, I just think about, I tell stories about the characters all the time. It was, so I mean, again, it was like basically the near writing and role playing for me are both the nearest thing to living. I mean, I have said, you know, before, until the day when I do actually, the Hollow Hills do open for me, and I
Mm.
do go through into a more magical world. I write and I dream, and role playing was another part of that. I got to play. My character is actually, the character I played is, Thalia is in Empires of Dust is kind of based on her, but it's not.
Mm.
It's not like,
Mm.
it wasn't like she was based on her as in I was like, oh, I'll take this role
Mm.
playing character, turn her
Mm.
into a character.
Mm.
But she's like, we played, a lot of what we played was just us being characters in that world. We weren't.
Mm.
It wasn't the kind of bam, bam, bam. You know, we're going through a
Mm.
dungeon. We've got to do this, this, and this, and then we'll
Mm.
level up. It was very much
Definitely.
just us living in that world
Yeah.
and doing stuff in that world. And yeah, that I was just playing a part of myself who is
Mm.
then, I was then writing as Thalia. But yeah, no, it was just another. It was just a kind of another way of immersing myself in the more interesting, in the same way as my clothes are now. Yeah,
Mm.
I mean, I
Mm.
used to
Mm.
be really massively into, I used to be kind of, I used to be, before I had children, I was very much kind of on the goth scene, and that was the same
Mm.
thing as well. It was like,
Oh yeah.
go to Whitby Goth weekend wearing these
Yeah.
immense wigs and these huge skirts and
Mm. Mm.
hats. I had a hat so big I had to walk through the door sideways, and corsets and like, you know, and again, it was that being someone else for a while,
Mm.
that kind
Mm.
of,
Mm.
or not being myself, like having, you know, living in a more magical world. And
Yes.
role playing was that for me. And in fact, I'm actually sort of, I daren't go back to playing D&D now because I think I'd completely give up writing, because I just go back to, if I found a really good DM, and I'd just be like, okay, this is, I'm now living back in this world again, so
Mm.
I don't need to write anymore.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, like dressing up, it's a way of entering that magical reality. And well, I came from Goth Town, home in Bauhaus, so like
Oh,
that's where old Goths go to die. There's still a few of them there nursing their pints in the Great Horse or the King Billy or somewhere. But you know, so that was a huge part of my kind of formative years as well. Um, and I still have a huge soft spot for that kind of scene and that sort of music. Any excuse to put on some glad rags and to wave my arms around. I call it trying to dance your way out of a shroud. That's sort of like how I imagine goth music, or dancing to goth music, dancing your way out of a shroud. And like, yeah, I feel it's even more relevant and resonant now than ever. Think about the huge success of The Cure's latest album. Such a keynote album of last year that really captured the zeitgeist at the end of last year. And my goodness, it's interesting to be listening to them again after 30 years. But anyway, let's not go down that rabbit hole. We maybe talk about your writing. Um, but what got you first into writing? I mean, when did you first think of yourself as a writer, and what got you into it?
Oh no, this is all where it gets really complicated. So
Mm.
this is my tragic backstory, my
Mm.
inspiration and tragic backstory. So first of all, I'm dyslexic. So, and I really struggle. My spelling is terrible. My handwriting is terrible, and the
Mm.
way I process words. So most of my manuscripts, I really regularly have all the words are in the wrong order and things are misspelt. And actually, I don't think, if I hadn't been born at the right time for access to computers, if I'd been born even slightly earlier, I don't think I'd have got through university,
Mm. Mm.
because I think
Interesting.
if I'd just been pen and paper writing everything,
Mm.
and I don't think I'd have coped very well in, like, you know, employment and things,
Mm.
because I think, because I need to type. I don't think I could be a writer without
Mm.
access to, without having a laptop keyboard. But then when people talk about, it's going off the subject completely, when people talk about, you know, Elon Musk saying, oh, we'll put chips in our brains and it'd be so amazing, you know, we just talk to the computer and it will write it all down, or we don't even need to talk to the computer, you know, we can just sort of think it. I couldn't do that either. I need to write, type. And I suspect if I'd been born 100 years ago, I would not have been able to learn to read and write. But yeah, so I remember struggling to learn to read and being stuck on those wretched, really basic Janice and John books when pretty much everyone else in my class was actually kind of reading proper little storybooks, and I had to do remedial spelling classes at secondary school. But yeah, so writing has always been a slightly weird thing for me because I have no problems. I read very fast and very inaccurately, but my handwriting is terrible, and things I write are just chaos. But also, so my father is a writer; he's a poet, and yeah, he runs. So he's a poet and also a kind of editor and publisher of poetry. He ran a press. He's run a small magazine and press called Great Works since I was born, and so. I grew up surrounded by poets and artists, and we knew a lot of people who did sort of ceramics and things. You know, most of the people I grew up knowing, most of the parents' friends, were very creative people. A lot of them were also. So my father met a lot of them either through his poetry or he taught English in FE college. So again, a lot of people who taught English or humanities and were artistic. One of her friends was an architect, so that kind of creative world. And we went to see a lot of theatre. We had wonderful books around the house all the time, of course. And there's a direct line between. So my dad studied poetry and American literature under a guy who'd studied poetry under Pound. So you know, that's the kind of links. And so I kind of grew up with just everyone. You know, it just seemed entirely natural to write, and I told myself stories. That's how I played. I didn't play with other children particularly. I went around telling myself stories. And they were always fantasy and science fiction stories based on particularly Celtic and Greek mythology. I was telling myself fan fiction basically, and going off on my own little riffs on fairy tales and folklore. But then and then sort of at school, I just sort of, I mean, partly I became a teenager and you get interested in like relationships and going out and kind of, but I did used to write as a teen, and then I just sort of stopped. I went through that sort of classic kind of lonely teenage, no one understands me. I'm also autistic. I'm also undiagnosed as autistic. I hadn't been diagnosed as dyslexic, dyspraxic or autistic, all of which I am as a teenager. And I had some really bad times, and I just stopped writing. And then, I mean, I was at university. I did degrees, I did a PhD, and actually I know people who do apparently write creatively while also doing a PhD, but I was slightly amazed how they have the time and the mental energy. But then I just sort of stopped. My life was just kind of, and then I got an office job. I just kind of, writing kind of felt like something, I got in this really bad sort of loop of like writing was something that wasn't for me. It kind of felt like writing is to be a writer just felt like such an impossible thing that, you know, when people say things like, oh, I'd quite like to be a writer, I felt like that's like saying, well, I mean, I'd quite like to score the winning goal in a World Cup, or I'd
like to be an astronaut or something.
Yes, I'd quite like to headline Wembley, or, you know, it's kind of, I think my career choice is to be Beyonce. Like, you know, that's just, that's probably not going to happen. And being a writer kind of felt like that. It felt as unobtainable as sort of these poor children you see now. So like, well, I'm going, you know, obviously my career aspiration is to like become a billionaire YouTuber, and you're like, yeah. So I just kind of, but then of course, because I'd had this sort of upbringing where most of the people I knew were writers, and then, you know, family friends ran a literature festival at Ways with Words Literature Festival at Dartington Hall, which some people might be familiar with, which was a really well-known literature festival. So I mean, I've gone out, you know, I've been out for lunch with Ben Ockery I've been out for
mm,
lunch with Will Self. My mum once had to cook a buffet for 30 people, including the editor of the Good Food Guide. I spent my whole life surrounded by all these amazing. In fact, my old family friends were Hamish Dunbar, who people may have been familiar with. Cafe Otto got a big shout out at the Oscars last week. My dad used to run a poetry event there. I used to help him organise it. So it was like, on the one hand, I was living in this totally creative world full of poets and musicians and writers, and it just seeming in some ways fairly normal to be going out and eating burger and chips with Ben Okri. On the other hand, it being this sort of incredibly painful, the idea I could be part of this world as opposed to running around backstage, kind of setting things, sort of setting the chairs up. And that seemed like that was the only role I could ever have in that world, would be sort of setting the chairs up and, sort of, being, and it wasn't until I'd had all my diagnoses and I had children, and I don't know what, I think it was probably my autism diagnosis that just kind of changed something in my sense of myself. I think made me able to accept that, one, there were a lot of things wrong with me. I mean, when people talk about things like autism as a superpower, it's like, it wasn't a superpower. There's a load of things. It's been really, my life has not been great because of it. I would never succeed in a commercial job. I didn't have my writing, and I've been stuck working full time in a kind of fairly junior office job for the rest of my life, which I still do 3 days a week, but that's bearable because of the writing. But I'm never. But having to be able to actually say that, I can't. There are lots of things I can't do. There are lots of things that don't seem to work in my brain the way it works in other people's brain. I'm not set up to function in the kind of society we live in. It somehow really freed something. So I just started writing one day when my son was asleep, and a year later I'd finished The Cult of Broken Knives. And then a week after that, it wasn't even a week, it was like less than a week after I'd finished the first draft of Cult of Broken Knives, I had an agent and had this, and then I had this big, massive book deal, and then it was like, oh my God.
It was written, as they say. So how did you get the agent then so quickly? You pitched very, very quickly after completing your.
Yes. I kind of knew. I mean, after years of feeling like writing is absolutely impossible, writing a book felt as impossible as like walking on the ceiling or something. It just felt absolutely not even like sort of scoring the winning goal at Wembley, because someone has obviously done that in the past, but it felt like writing a book felt like for you to just casually say to me, Anna, why don't you just go and walk up and down the ceiling? It just felt physically impossible. But then when I was writing it, I mean, it was absolutely all consuming. It completely neglected everything for a year. I was ill quite a lot at work that year, let's say. And I was like completely like, we're just having cereal tonight because I'm just going upstairs and writing. Everyone just have to manage. And because it was just pouring out, and I knew it was good. I knew it was a good book, and I've read enough books to know that it was a good book, and I just felt this absolute incredible excitement. And just in this kind of absolutely bizarre, this sudden, total, absolute bizarre confidence, I just got an agent. And I mean, partly there's a huge amount of luck in getting an agent. If he'd not been in a particular mood, if he'd got a book, if another 4 people had submitted books which had a similar theme, which weren't, we say to people, you could have written the best novel in the entire universe about werewolves, say. And unfortunately, if an agent or a publisher has already that week had 4 really rubbish books about werewolves, they're going to be, oh Christ, another book about werewolves. I'm not going to open yours, and that's their loss and your loss. But it's just one of those, or they had a heavy night before, they're tired, they had a massive argument with their spouse this morning, whatever. They're just going to be like, I'm feeling this is obviously a rubbish book, in the way that we all are when we're in a bad mood or feeling ill.
Sure.
And so I mean, part of it was obviously just luck, but part of it was, and also I was one of the kind of early. There still aren't that many women writing grimdark. So I think kind of I was probably, again, I was doing something slightly different, because it is a sort of sort of feminist, explicitly feminist writing of grimdark, and just having a woman writing grimdark kind of was something slightly. It still is something slightly novel. There aren't that many of us. So
it's a good USP, isn't it?
Yes. But it was just kind of mixture of luck and I'd like to think, and obviously
hard work.
It's a good book. Yes, I mean, kind of, it's not. There could be other people. I say it's always because it was a good book, and that partly obviously was it, because an agent wouldn't take it up if it wasn't. But I think there's a lot of obviously luck as well, and kind of
serendipity, the will of the gods.
Yeah. I still
I sacrificed enough goats that week.
Well, sometimes I still get this terrible fear that one day I'm going to wake up and discover that actually it's all been a dream. That actually everything from when sitting down and writing the first sentence has actually just been a brief dream, and I'm going to wake up and discover none of this has ever happened, because it still feels a bit like, whoa.
Isn't that crazy though? I mean, like, for someone of your talent and success to still have imposter syndrome. I mean, I get a lot of this with my students, and for instance, if there's a new class, I can guarantee everybody in that class will be feeling, oh, I'm not as good as everybody else. So I call that imaginary person the superior other. If everybody imagines everybody else is better than them, who is this imaginary other, this superior other? They don't exist. It's a construct. But in a way, in some way, that humility, whatever it is healthy to a certain extent. It avoids hubris. Certainly, it stops you becoming complacent. It keeps you on your toes, keeps you pushing yourself, pushing your practice, pushing your writing. So I think an element of that is good, as long as it doesn't stop you from writing. So it encourages the rest of us as well, us mere mortals, to have a crack at it too. Because like you said back in the day, you thought writing was something other people did in a way, that it was in the realm of the gods and not for us mere mortals. But all those immortals started off as mortals, at some point, on scraps of paper in the pockets and hollows of the day, just making it happen because they had to write that book, like you. And so that's a good sign when it's just burning in your breast and you have to write it. If I don't write, I start to go a bit nuts. I think it's like a waterfall. Why block the waterfall? Let it flow. So I'm so glad you do.
Yeah, no, I do it all the time now. I do have to write almost all the time now, but I find it really painful. Part of me really hates writing, because I'm every sentence I'm, oh my god, it's not very good, and I'm agonizing it over all the time. And I am that kind of tortured writer who says, oh my god, this is terrible, but I must keep going, and god, I don't want to do this, it's all awful, why am I doing this, it's terrible. And then occasionally I'm like, wow, this is going so really, really well, and then I'm like, my god, what if I'm thinking like, I must stop thinking it's going really well, because that's obviously a sign. Yes, that is obviously hubris, and it's all obviously terrible. And I am an absolute tortured writer. I was having a conversation with Agent Tchaikovsky about this, and he was like, he just really enjoys writing. He sits down and writes, and it's really enjoyable, and then he stops writing. And I'm like, god, no. I'm like, I suppose I kind of approach writing rather like a finals exam. I mean, I've always been quite good at exams. I'm one of those people who kind of, in some ways, enjoys exams. I was always quite enjoyed exams, and that kind of pushing yourself, or moments in my day job when people are asking me to write 3 different documents simultaneously and things, and everyone thinks like, you need to do this in the next 5 minutes. When you did this 5 minutes ago, you need to write it now. And that moment of extreme stress, and when my brain's just going, and I do quite enjoy that in a kind of weird masochistic, like, this isn't what it means to be alive. I'm functioning at, I'm getting, my brain's going at 5 billion miles an hour. This is what it means to be alive. And then I crash, and that's kind of how I write. And I approach it rather like an exam, like, oh god.
Interesting. When it gets it done, that's the main thing. And it is work, in terms of it takes effort. And I mean, it's my happy place, but if I haven't worked on a project for a while, it does take me a day or two to get back into the zone. And for those first couple of days, it feels like I can't write at all. I'm wading through treacle. Um, I'm in the swamp, but then it starts to flow again. It's like, wow, and it's the best thing ever. What they call a fugue state or flow state. But it can't just happen like that. You know, I am code switching all the time between my various roles and hats and so on. But sometimes there's a bit of strain as you switch between paradigms until you find that register of voice again. Um, but I wanted to ask you to go back a bit to the early days, or the earliest days even. Were there any gateway texts, as I call them, that got you into fantasy?
I see. So some of my earliest memories are my dad reading me things like we had this absolutely wonderful book of Norse myths called Axe Age Wolf Age by Kevin Crossley Holland, which is a really, really stunning retelling of the Norse myths. We had I remember really clearly a book called The Island of the Mighty, which is a children's retelling of the Mabinogion, which
Mm,
is beautifully illustrated in a sort of slightly faux medieval style. It was just and that was just really beautiful. And
mm,
there's such strange stories, both the
mm,
Norse myths and the Mabinogion, and then the Greek myths, and lots of sort of strange children's books. I had a wonderful, wonderful children's book called The Bread Horse by Alan Garner, which is a very strange, it's a children's picture book, but it is the most freaky. It's basically about the kind of the myth of the horse in Indo-European mythology. So
mm,
it has hobby horses, it has the Marilud, it has sort of there's the myth of the Pegasus being born from the Gorgon's head, and in some versions the Gorgons have this sort of horse-like quality. It has all these
mm,
sort of basically there's a whole thing in sort of Indo-European mythology of horses as these incredibly dangerous, man-eating, and this book really went into that. It was
mm,
all
mm,
about it was about being child being bullied and being made to play this game called the bread horse, where you have to carry children around the playground.
mm,
So it then leads into these sort of fantasies of all these kind of incredibly dangerous horse archetypes, and it's the weirdest children's book.
mm.
It's a children's picture book, so it's one of those. It's got like very small, it's big pictures, very few words per page, but it is so strange and frightening. And I remember I was obsessed with that, and also ancient history. I had this wonderful Usborne Children's History of the World, which it literally started
Yes, yeah.
from the Big Bang. And the one that would really obsessed me was the stuff about the very beginning of sort of the Neolithic.
Mm,
So you'd have these sort of the tales digging up Jericho, and the skulls with the plaster. There's the plaster faces put on them and carry shells for
mm,
eyes, and Sumer, and the eagle and the bear, the eagle and bull cult in Catalhuyuk, and I would read this particular volume absolutely obsessively. I've still got it, and
mm.
it's got children's baby's breakfast cereal all over it because I'd read it every morning having breakfast. And it was so these kind of weird, these kind of strange other. I mean, it's sort of I can't say other realities because most of these this all the sort of ancient history, actually it was all there, but
Mm,
real. But yeah, these kind of
mm.
other worlds that were totally different from the reality I was living in,
That's interesting.
which is the thing that it was always the thing that was around me. Then obviously, having poets and storytellers and things.
Mm,
A childhood friend of my parents he was a professional storyteller, and he was professional. He sort of tells ghost stories, and
mm,
so I just sort of and he's yeah. I mean, I remember him going for a walk in the woods with him,
mm,
singing sort of things, bits of Chaucer and things.
mm. Fantastic.
Yeah, I went to see sort of a really, really famous version of the Mystery Praise that was
Mm,
done at
mm,
St Maltings, and so I just kind of grew up with
mm,
language, but a lot of it obviously is fantastical. I mean, a lot of poetry is fantastical. My father was heavily into his sort of modernist and postmodernist poetry,
mm.
and I mean, what is the Wasteland if not a kind of fantastical journey through the ultimate fantasy city in some ways? It's kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
what they're doing is pushing at language and really kind of trying to sort of really push perceptions of reality in language. And again, you know, the Romantic poets, one of my father's other favourite poets, but you know, Blake and Coleridge, both of whom are creating, you know, it's to say they're fantasy authors, yeah, to say it would now be considered utterly derivative. I'm sure many of your colleagues, if you said, "Oh, Coleridge is writing fantasy," they're like, "No, he's not. He's writing poetry." But you know what? He's writing fantasy. Blake is writing. God knows what Blake's writing.
He
but
created his own cosmology. Yes, I mean, talk about universes. He definitely created, you know, one of the first and best universes. But isn't it telling that, you know, you were surrounded by this rich kind of ecosystem, and it's testimony to how important that kind of environment is to nurture a child's imagination, to give it the best kind of like nutrients in a way, almost like a mulch. And you can't kind of force what will manifest out of that mulch, but you can create the conditions conducive for manifestation, and then you see what happens. You stand back and see what happens. But you know, so education, but you know, access to literature, libraries, being surrounded by culture of all kinds, I think so important, and we need that now more than ever.
Yeah, no, both my parents went into education in different ways. So my father was an FE lecturer, and my mother was a primary school an infant school teacher, but they both went into education for those reasons, because it felt politically important to get children and young people, give them nurture, give them rich environment, give them creativity and free thinking, and just encourage them to expand their minds. And that, you know, my mum, an infant school teacher, that was, you know, just giving children just opportunities, just showing them things and giving them opportunities, just saying, look at, you know, go outside and look at that tree, go and actually look at the tree and go and look at the light and things. And my dad teaching, I mean, I suspect he went into teaching English literature as an FE lecturer, so we could, the classic thing, so we could keep reading the subjects. But yeah, trying to give young people from a fairly deprived background, just like, you know, here are books, here are whole worlds that you could experience, and just go away and think about them.
Yes.
And then, and it's so, I mean, my children are at school now, and I look at the curriculum they're doing, and it's it just makes me want to weep. Just the level of just total. My daughter came home a while ago. She said, "Oh, we're doing Macbeth. We read Lady Macbeth's great soliloquy." I was like, "Oh, amazing! That's, you know, that's one of the greatest bits of literature. You know, Lady Macbeth's got some of the greatest speeches in all literature. What were you doing with it? Did you read it out? Did you perform it? Did you read it? What did you do?" We underlined the verbs.
Oh, geez. You know, that kind of teaching is often aversion therapy for a lot of people. And, you know, sometimes it takes them years to come back to it. You know, I get mature students, you know, who had like traumatizing experiences at school, and it's taken a long time to come back to the love of language, love of poetry or whatever, because they've been put off. You know, I think teachers do a very hard job, and you know, many of them are fantastic, but I think the national curriculum often flattens things and can risk killing things. You know, that's why it's great to have, like, you know, a lively and continually circulating, I don't know, reading list of new material, of classics, but also contemporary stuff, and fantasy, I think, especially, rather than it being an escape from reality, you know, I think it equips us with so many useful skills, you know, critical thinking, you know, thinking outside of the box. You know, I would argue that fantasy enlarges the ontological imaginary. It enables us to imagine other worlds, other ways of being in the world, which is so important these days. Not only does it teach kind of sort of compassionate literacy, as I call it, but also it just helps us to imagine other worlds, you know, other kind of realities, which, let's face it, we need now more than ever.
You know, I mean, I felt really, I did a panel about sort of literature versus fantasy, and one of those ridiculous, is fantasy is there any possibility fantasy might be considered literature? Panel was at Bristol Cotton, where we all agreed, like, you know, this is such a rubbish, obviously it's literature. But one of the things I've really noticed is that, particularly the Guardian and the Observer, their book reviews what they review as literature now are basically, they don't even review sort of realist novels anymore. What they basically review is memoirs. It's like they're not even, you know, they're reviewing, so they'll review things like Sally Rooney, who is basically writing very boring realism. But what they really want to review, but they're not, you know, even that's like, well, it's made up, isn't it? She made these people up. They weren't real people.
Yeah.
People that what they're really considered, what they're almost embarrassed even by, even really realist novels because they're made up. What they really want the big reviews they give now are for memoirs, because it's like, because this idea of, well, this is real, this is not fantasy, this is real. And it's that real narrowing of kind of that sort of, well, you want to read something in which is, you know, true, and you see, you know, reality is reflected. Well, one, it's not true because it's words and it's always made up. Anyone's version, you know, an autobiography is, most of our autobiographies are fundamentally made up. But it's you know, it just seems such a kind of ridiculously, the point of reading is for me the opposite. It's to experience, not to experience, this is true, I can really relate to this, but to experience, gosh, this is something I never even thought of. This is possibility I never even imagined. This is a way of, this is experiences I could never have had. And I think that does make you probably a more empathetic.
Totally.
In terms of trying to understand where other people are coming from, and
need that more than ever. To look in other people's shoes, but also imagine, you know, beings without shoes. You know, but I find the mimetic bias in the mainstream really like boring and stultifying, and it forecloses on the imagination. You know, and it shows some kind of cowardice, like, you know, you have to be trapped in empiricism and materiality because that's the only way of like being in the world, and that's the only reality there is, which is nonsense. And I think there's still this snobbishness about fantasy and sci-fi and any kind of, like, you know, of those in the mainstream, at least, even though fantasy is like the most popular mode of the modern age. Let's face it, it's everywhere: film, TV, computer games, graphic novels, etc. You know, but there's still this snobbishness about it. You know, it's kind of like wearying in a way, but everybody enjoys it. That's the thing. So let's talk about your writing in more particular detail now. You are known for your kick-ass female characters. Tell us about those and how important it is for there to be strong, positive representation of women in fiction.
Oh goodness! So I wouldn't even say some of my female characters are positive.
Okay.
So I mean, so, and actually, I mean, the Empires of Dust, there aren't that many women in it. So it's, I mean, I also realised the Court of Broken Knives, because I think you get a good 50 pages in before you basically have any women in it. You go right, pages and pages and pages that opens with some men, and then we move to some other men, and then we finally meet someone's wife, and her role is being someone's wife. And it's not for quite a long time that you meet the first actual big female character who actually has her own voice. And it's a very male book, and it's set in
feminist,
a very,
I suppose, isn't it?
Because it's a male world, but with me writing from the kind of, as a woman looking at, as a feminist looking at that world. So it is a toxically masculine world, but I'm kind of really aware of that. And I've said before, I kind of assumed people were aware of that in other worlds. So, you know, people always sort of say, well, you know, Game of Thrones is a very, if you look at it, if you really think about it, it's a toxic world, toxic masculine world. Like, well, I didn't really need to think about it. I assumed everyone knew that. Or that kind of, so when it wasn't kind of consciously that I'm going to write against the grain, I just kind of assumed everyone could see that those sort of medieval violent worlds of kings and warriors were obviously toxic and unpleasant, and sort of, so, and I just wrote them the way I'd always seen them. But so then we have this sort of female character. So Thalia she's not she's a very passive figure, and she is just the love interest, but she's the only character who speaks directly to the audience. So everyone else is told third person past tense. Thalia talks to the reader first person present tense. That wasn't intentional. She just started telling her story like that. She has some chapters where we have it's sort of her point of view, but third person present tense. But then she sometimes breaks off to have chapters where she's talking directly to the audience and actually basically talking about what's going on and what her role is and how she feels about all the events around her. Very direct and really unmediated. So in a sense, like everyone else's story, you're just seeing it unfolding, but she's actually talking directly to the reader. And it wasn't intended, it just happened. But that, I think, is kind of, she is almost sort of me talking, giving a kind of meta critique of what's going on in the book.
Interesting.
And she's not.
It's important to give her a voice, and to give a voice to marginalized characters. That's so empowering. But haven't you written a novel about a mother and a daughter?
Yes. So a woman of the sword was written is sort of written almost immediately. I'd finished writing the Empire of Dust trilogy, and that's about a woman and her sons, and that was written very much about me. The more I was so totally immersed in Empires of Dust that I was really thinking of myself. What would it be like for me in this world? I got really sort of thinking about. So a Woman of the Sword is essentially about me in that world as a kind of. She's not a powerful character. All Empires of Dust have got the traditional. Most people in it are powerful. They're kings, they're politicians, they're people they are special people. They're heavily involved in, and obviously they're involved in the big story about conquering the world and saving the world. She is like me in my office, me in my daily life. She just lives in a small town. She lives in a small town. She has she's a normal everyday person caught up in this world. And she is a warrior. She's a very good warrior. She is a mother. She's very ambiguous about whether she's a good mother or not. She's probably, I think, a better mother than she thinks she is. But she is not. She is me in a kind of. She's not a positive character. She's sympathetic, but she makes a lot of mistakes. She's not happy. She's partly responsible for her own. She's quite heavily based, actually, she's drawn on Mother Courage, which I saw Fiona Shaw as Mother Courage, which was absolutely incredible. So she's based on. So again, Mother Courage is a normal person who is caught up in this sort of insanity of the 30 Years' War and makes a lot of mistakes. Is not a sympathetic person, but you cannot help but empathise with her as someone who is trying to survive in this world. And so that was. So yeah, Lide she's kick-ass in some way. She's a warrior. She we begin with this wonderful scene where she is better at fighting than most of the men around. But at the same time, she is not an entirely sympathetic character. But then, as a response to that, I then consciously decided to write something more positive. It was coming out of COVID, everything was going back to, life was coming back to normal a bit. And I wanted to write something more hopeful, more positive. I did consciously want to create something that was hopeful. So then I wrote a woman called Canda, who is a mother of teenage daughters. That it was a careful contrast. She is Lide is a mother of sons, and then Canda is the mother of daughters. It was sort of, there are scenes in the two books which parallel each other, but the way that the two mothers respond is totally different. And she was written as, okay, if Lide in A Woman with a Sword is me as I fear I am, she's my fears about not being a good mother. She's my fears about that awkwardness, all my memories of all the endless times, which, as someone pointed out in a review of it, we often make the biggest mistakes and say the most stupid things and respond in the most stupid, painful ways to the people we love the most. That kind of classic, when it really matters, we often really fuck up. And so the idea is very much those kind of fears and memories of all those times that I have really fucked up around my children, my children, my parents. And then Canda was written in a kind of, I'm going to write someone, she's going to be based on my sense of the women and the mummy friends I know who are, who I admire. And I'm sure in their lives they would say, no, I fucked up so many times. I'm nothing like that. But, that sense of she's what I want to be. And she's the kind of people I admire and think the way that they present themselves, at least, is admirable, and if I could be more like that, that would be good. And yeah, so she is fundamentally very positive. She's fundamentally, she's a very strong, powerful, fundamentally good person, but she still makes mistakes. And in fact, yeah, she still makes mistakes. She's had terrible things in her past. And actually, one of the things I wanted to write about her was that she's very human, in that she talks about the fact she's middle-aged now. She's definitely getting a bit flabby. She's going a bit grey. You know, she's not beautiful. She's not. Her relationship with her husband is the two middle-aged people. She, you know, Marriage and Thalia in Empires of Dust. So these two ridiculously beautiful young people having this sort of, you know, James Bond life of like wild, exciting sex in endless beautiful locations. And it's all, you know, everything is beautiful places and beautiful clothes and power. And Candace and her husband have this, you know, they're middle-aged. They probably don't, you know, it's not about amazing desire and beauty and wonder and sweeping romance and tragedy. It's about two middle-aged people who've got it. You know, one of them puts the bins out, the other one does the washing up, kind of, and they're just living that kind of. And it was so nice writing about that kind of, just that sort of, that kind of messiness of life, and they're all kind of bickering, and actually listening to her children all quarrelling is actually something that makes me really happy at one point, because that's normal, boring life. And yeah, and she sort of. She has there's this sort of scene where she has fairly rubbish sex. Well, she just has a very ordinary sex with her husband, and she's aware of the fact that he's got really bad breath. And you know, it's just that, you know, it's that kind of normal life. And I really like that about her, and lots of people have really liked that about her.
That's fantastic. Yeah, mimesis and the anti-mimesis, the magical and the mundane.
She's living in an utterly magical world, but she's also treasuring the mundaneness of her life, and kind of she's not sort of despairing of her, you know. I sort of say, like, oh, you know, one day the Hollow Hills will open and I'll go through. It's not like I'm utterly despairing of my life and just like, God, this is so awful, I hate my life, I hate living in this suburban life, having this crappy office job. You know, there are things, it's that kind of mixture of, you know, the mundane reality, messy daily life is good, but the magic is also good. But, yeah.
But likewise, I mean, like, if I ever hear the fairy music coming from the hills, I'll be down there like a shot. Uh, uh, but you mentioned Lady Macbeth. Who are your favourite female characters from genre fiction?
Oh, goodness. So, I mean, I guess, Tenor in Le Guin's Earthsea Quartet is, again, those are books that I had. I remember those are books sort of, you know, I remember looking at the covers before I read. My dad had copies that had obviously been his copies. So I remember he'd obviously bought them. I don't think he could have had them when he was a child, but because he's too old. But yeah, he obviously had them around the house that he'd been reading. So I remember looking at those covers before I could read, years before I read them. And the Tombs of Aswan was, I'm never sure whether the Tombs of Aswan, I always sort of, there's such good books. I don't know, if someone said to me, which of those books is your favourite? I don't know. I love the Tombs of Aswan so much when I was a child. And now as I get older, I read the Farthest Shore and think that is just astonishing. And then Tahanu, I get the kind of Tahanu where actually very little actually happens. It is a kind of pastoral, again, it's about normal life in a fantasy world, and it's just beautiful. But the character of Tenor and her changing relationship with Gerd in Tombs of Aswan, and in Tahanu particularly, and her relationship with Tharu in Tahanu, those are just astonishing books. I just can't. I recap back to them and read them again and again. And but sort of more recent. Actually, I have a real love for a character called Dorin Verikai in Elizabeth Moon's Paladin's Legacy series. She's a strong mercenary leader. She is the kind of kick-ass, the really kind of traditional kick-ass. She leads a mercenary company. She's not got any interest in men or children. She is the kind of virago paladin.
Mm.
She's fairly asexual. She sort of strides around with her sword, but then there's just this one wonderful scene where she's also got magic. There's this wonderful scene where we're all under attack and we're being attacked by evil, terrible magical forces. All the men in, she's got this, so they're barricaded in a house under a sort of terrible night attack by, I think they're evil. They've got their evil sort of chaos, evil sort of blood mages. She single-handedly fights them all off. Then she heals all the people who've been attacked by them. Then she fries up a nutritious yet healthy breakfast, extremely tasty breakfast for them all. And I love
Sounds
that.
like my kind of woman.
Yes, again, she's like the kind of, she's like the ultimate fantasy mum. She can actually, she can just like completely cream an entire elite squad of blood mages. And then she's like, right, look, just everyone sit down, let's sort it out. And then she's like, she then also sort of turns up like your mum might have turned up after a teenage party got out of control. She's like, right, let's deal with it. And she does, and she cooks them all breakfast, and then they're all and I love her because she is that kind of she's kind of, and she's not sort of hugely, she's not the sort of Red Sonja strut. I mean, I love characters like Anya Sonja, but she's not the sort of strutting around in the bikini armor. She's she's not drawn sexually. She's middle-aged. She's not got any interest in sort of sex or her appearance. She's just she's just incredibly capable. But then the books have this absolutely amazing, astonishing kind of radical feminist ending where they actually end. She kind of saves the day, but but not in a violent way.
Oh, interesting.
You should read them because she ends up. She so you'd be really interested in them because she ends up, a massive spoiler, there's this whole thing set up where she's got this crown, which is this special magical crown, and we've got this whole thing set up for 4.5 books where it's like, okay, there's going to be we're going to have the massive battle at the end, and she's going to lead the good armies against the baddie, and she's going to wear this, she's going to put on this crown and become queen. What actually happens halfway through the final book is the baddie just dies. He just gets sick and dies, and his army disintegrates. And when it turns out what the crown does is she puts on the crown and goes out into this terrible desert, and she creates water, and she turns the desert into beautiful, fertile land. And that's how the book ends.
Yes, that's
and
very
most people apparently have read the book and are like, what? 4.5 books building up to the big battle. And then the chapter, the baddie dies, and then we have this ridiculous and then the grass grows.
Oh, that's great.
What? But no, I'm like, that's just okay. It's totally just like, what the hell happened there? That came out of nowhere. I was 4.5 books. I assumed there'd be a big fight, and there isn't a big fight. It is really strange, but it's just, to have it. Yeah, to have this guy, and she's walking through this, she's walking with the water, and obviously there's suddenly you do get all this kind of sexual stuff about the water and the kind of flowing waves and all that stuff, and people talk about, the female orgasm as endless rolling waves and blah, blah, blah. And there is that suddenly comes in. But there's also this sense of just, she is the mother goddess making this land fertile, and it's just superb.
Sounds fantastic.
It is absolutely fantastic.
I'm aware we've been talking for now. Yes. Shall we have a quick break? And then if it's okay, I could still have a few questions. Can you spare another half an hour?
Happy to carry on. Yes, I can carry on. Yeah, we can just carry on. Yeah.
So let's have 5 minutes and come back 10 past if that's okay. Thank you so much.
Shall I just dial in again, or what am I doing?
I'll leave it running, and just rejoin us in 5 minutes. Thank you so much.
Okay. Right.
Mm. Mhm.
Oh,
Hey,
just
thanks for coming back.
sorry, I just made a second cup of tea.
Oh, nice. And you didn't make me one. Oh, I've got the biscuits.
Oh well, I can't eat biscuits because I'm celiac. So
Oh no. Oh.
yes,
Um, can you have like gluten-free biscuits or anything like
yes,
that?
but they're horrible.
No. Okay.
Yes.
Uh, um, so yeah, let's see how far we get. We don't have to like cover everything, but it's been so interesting, so fascinating. I've just been really enjoying all of your responses. Um, so let's see how far we get. So I was going to turn to Grimdark now because obviously you're well known for that, and you're involved in the Grimdark magazine. So
Yeah.
why do you think Grimdark has been a popular mode of fantasy? With the massive success of Game of Thrones, one could argue it became, at least for a while, the dominant mode of our age, manifesting in films, TV dramas, computer games, graphic novels, art, music. Why did that happen, and is it still relevant?
It's interesting because it seems to be sort of coming back again. So yeah, it was absolutely huge
Mm,
in the 2010s.
mm,
And I mean, I think partly it was just, apparently some people say it was a kind of coincidence that so Joe Abercrombie and Mark Lawrence's first books were published at around the same time, and then that was a couple of years before Game of Thrones, the television series, started. And obviously Game of Thrones books have been written and coming out at around that time. But and then sort of post that around the time of the pandemic, I mean, I actually used to joke to people that grimdark would peak and end and sort of start diminishing popularity around the time that my books were being published, which did in fact happen. Yeah, I mean, I had this incredibly kind of, yeah, it sounds like I had this absolutely, amazing, I got an agent overnight and it was so amazing. But yeah, grimdark definitely did plunge in popularity around the time my books were being published. It was kind of, things were definitely moving on. Well, I mean, so the paperback of The House of Sacrifice, the third book in my series, came out the week lockdown happened. So the books were all there in the bookshelves, and then the bookshops were literally locked. So and there was definitely, grimdark definitely did dip hugely in popularity. And there was a cozy fantasy and then romantasy. But I'm now told that grimdark is becoming more popular again.
And maybe because we live in such horrible times.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because my sort of theory on it often is that so you kind of get to this point in it's interesting because the financial crash kind of buggers up my timeline a bit, but you do get to this you have this sort of idea up until quite recently that things are kind of going to get better. I mean, it's difficult to explain to people, but I was too young to really remember it. But in the early 80s, there was that genuine fear of total nuclear war.
I remember. Yeah.
My mum actually seriously thought about taking us all to New Zealand at one point. You look at things like, I mean, if you watch something like Deutschland 83, or the Operation Able Archer, that we were seriously on several occasions in the early 80s, things came fairly close to total nuclear destruction.
Yes,
not war, but absolute nuclear annihilation. And obviously, so the Cold War ends. There is that, there's that famous moment where there's that sort of his right-wing historian who writes his book, The End of History, which, I mean, that worked out well, didn't it? But yeah, sort of, there's this sort of idea at that point that liberal democratic capitalism has won. And liberal democratic capitalism at that point, for all its many failings, is probably better than the sort of totalitarian regimes of Eastern Europe. And there's also this kind of vague idea that, we're aware of the environment and no one's being, it's not like anyone's making any big steps, but people are making this kind of vague, oh, well, we probably ought to recycle, and we probably ought to start thinking about, it's not a green revolution, but there's this kind of vague idea of, okay, so we probably ought to get a bit more environmentally responsible. And there's this kind of vague idea. It's not like people are really racist and people are really homophobic and people are really sexist and ableist, but there's this kind of vague idea that's probably inappropriate, and vaguely over time we'll get less and we'll all get a bit nicer. And there is this kind of sense, it's not in any way like the 1990s and 2000s were a utopia, but there's this vague sense that things will get better. And basically we'll all end up living like middle class, white, fairly liberal democratic people in Britain and America, which frankly there are probably worse ways to live. And there's this kind of vague sense of, things will all just get a bit nicer and things will be all right. And I think grimdark is partly written as a reaction to that for the first time people feel there's that kind of sense of being able to critique your heroes. We live in a fairly comfortable world. Certainly in America and Western Europe, we live in a pretty comfortable world. We have this vague sense that things are going to get better. We're all quite educated. There's this vague sense that things are all right and things are going to get better. So we can critique, we can be very, very critical. And, we can take a cynical attitude, almost because it doesn't matter. We can totally undermine our heroes. We can try to say, oh, yeah, Aragorn. I mean, clearly he was actually shagging Aunt Eowyn, and, and then, you can build all these other stories and undermine the heroes. because it feels quite safe. We're in a safe place to be able to do that, to be able to have that very cynical kind of, oh yeah, everyone's just out for themselves kind of, we're all just really horrible people deep down, because we kind of know it's safe to do that. And that's part of what grimdark does, of course, is it is, in some ways, I sort of say to people, grimdark is just fantasy, but with an element of historical realism, as in the people are flawed, the characters are flawed human beings in the way that most people are flawed human beings. They're fighting a war that isn't about, it's not the kind of Aragorn as this kind of amazing paragon of goodness. And you can obviously see, and there's obviously an incredibly righteous cause, which is incredibly important he wins, because that is not really historically very realistic. And actually, you know, even in the very rare occasions where wars have been fairly good versus evil clear cut, most of the protagonists on the good side have been pretty flawed people. And in most situations, wars have just been totally pointless, and there's been no, you know, there's been no sense of good or bad. It's just realpolitik, and that sense of being able to talk like that and kind of interrogate fantasy tropes in that way, if in a place of safety, from a place of safety, I think is and to sort of push those boundaries. I mean, they're kind of the gleeful anti-heroes, characters like George Ancrath, who is just gleefully unpleasant, and the point is he's gleefully unpleasant. He's not, you're not supposed to find him admirable, you're supposed to find him incredibly cool, but because he's absolutely pushing at the limits of everything he does, is the whole point of the book is it's supposed to be blatantly offensive. It's got that sort of it is like films like, it's like, it is like those sort of bad taste films like Bad Taste. It is deliberately trying to push you to be, or sort of, yeah, the sort of that kind of point of just this is we know this is incredibly bad taste, but that's the point. And then you get, and the financial, there's this interesting, because the financial crash is right in the middle of this, and I think the financial crash probably builds to some of this as well, because there's that sense of, I mean, it doesn't affect people in quite, it's not like it's world changing, and it's not like it's kind of terrifying in the same way that kind of early 80s period of fear about mutual assured destruction is, but it kind of actually kind of builds into that narrative around cynicism. There's that, you know, there's that wonderful Leonard Cohen lines about from everybody knows the dice are loaded, everybody knows the good guy lost, and the financial crash completely builds into that, because it's so obvious that kind of on one level you've got this wonderful, you know, the Berlin Wall's come down, apartheid ended in South Africa, Nelson Mandela has been made as president of South Africa, Northern Ireland, we have the Good Friday Agreement. On the one hand, we've got all these kind of wonderful moments of peace and a wonderful narrative of human progress, but on the other hand, we also have this slightly weirdly distant, because no one understands any of the financial system, sense of, but it's all fixed, isn't it? It's all rigged. And we can't always say it's all cynical, and it is all about money, and it's always the little guy is always going to be trampled on. The class war's over, they won. But then we get Brexit, and we get Trump, and we get COVID, and it doesn't feel safe anymore. People want to go back to having the fantasy narrative. People want comfort. People really don't want to be having to engage with, to sort of, people want something safer. People want to retreat. Apparently during COVID, what most people were reading was old books. People going back and rereading books they'd read in their but sort of adult books, not children's books, but the adult books that they'd read when they were teenagers. You know, those kind of the first books that you read when you were first reading sort of books, adult books. That was what people went back to reading. No one was reading new books. People were not buying new books. They were buying or reread. If they were buying books, they were buying books they used to own, or they read in the library or something. And there's people want comfort. They want. They don't want to be made to think. I think they want something comforting. They want something familiar. They don't want to sort of, they don't want to be challenged. They don't want to be pushed, and also they want to retreat. And it just doesn't feel safe. I mean, there was sort of, I mean, making deliberately incredibly offensive bad taste jokes suddenly just doesn't feel safe anymore, because I mean, you make let's go about sort of Prince of Thorns. It opens with this famous incredibly bad taste rape joke, and the whole point is it's incredibly bad taste rape joke, and you're supposed to realize that. But then of course you suddenly have a president who essentially makes a bad taste rape statement as a way of that famous grab them by the pussy thing, and he's saying that completely straight as something you're supposed to admire. So suddenly making a really bad taste rape joke, it has a very, very different sense to it, because everything has changed.
Yeah.
So Grimdark, I mean, Grimdark just sort of not. There were still, I still have a really loyal small coterie of fans, and Grimdark magazine keeps going and things. But I think what they did, I think it does change, and it had to change at that point, because it was just too. It's very different being nihilistic in a world where suddenly we're back to. I mean, during COVID, it's a very different. It's difficult writing nihilism when you are, you're at home.
You're living it.
Fuck my die. Yes.
No, well, it's been really interesting hearing your defense of Grimdark, and it kind of makes sense in a way. It sounded necessary, cathartic, healthy, even. I would argue it's like the kind of punk phase of fantasy. Really, it had to happen after what Michael Moorcock called the epic poo of Tolkien and so on, where everything got a bit po-faced and righteous and worthy and so on. Any kind of hegemony, demands its opposite. The anti-hegemonic, the reaction against the mainstream. Tropes need to be deconstructed. The shibboleths, the sacred cows, they need to be slaughtered. I think that's necessary and healthy. But obviously, like you say, now it feels very different. And I often sense that Grimdark seemed to shut down hope in its unrelenting bleakness and survival of the fittest paradigm, almost feeding into that neoliberal paradigm. But I'm not saying it always does that, but for a while, certainly in its mainstream iterations, like I don't know, The Walking Dead, it seemed to be doing that. From Fox, it was seemed to be doing that in a way, almost telling us all to hoard our resources and save your own and fuck everybody else. And it felt like the wrong kind of message for our times. But does it offer something useful in our challenging times? Does it help us to narrativize and navigate trauma? Does it help us to survive? And,
I mean, there's a famous essay in famous in small Grimdark circles, in Grimdark, that was published in Grimdark magazine, called the Strange Hope of Grimdark, which is kind of, because the Grimdark is often about people who are on the margins, on the fringes. It is often quite like low fantasy. So I mean, even something like, again, Prince of Thorns, the character is a prince and then a king, but he is an outcast. The people him around him are his road brothers. They are outcasts. It's not the kind of, obviously Aragorn begins Lord of the Rings as an outcast, but he has a status. He's not shunned. He's not. A lot of characters in Grimdark are actually from the subaltern, are basically subaltern. You think about Logan Ninefingers in Abercrombie. He's kind of very again. He's very kind of important, but again, he's marginalised. There are a lot of characters who are marginalised, dismissed, mocked, and they are often the protagonists. So you have this sort of sense of, they are more like normal people. You can imagine being some of those characters.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And certainly defense, and again, because it's often about cynicism, it's about that kind of undermining, sort of, pointing out that the great heroes have feet of clay. It's in some ways a kind of quite radical act, pointing out it is the very opposite to the very strict hierarchy in Tolkien, where this chap just turns up and says, "Oh, I am your destined king," and everyone's like, hooray, he's our destined king. And in Grimdark, people would a grimdark version of Tolkien, people probably would have ended up, egging Aragorn in the streets or something. It's not that kind of the notion of there is a constant sense in traditional epic fantasy of the kind of the destined one and the kind of the literal white knight who's going to come and save us, and it's all kind of the secret prince, and it's because it's his bloodline. There's that whole emphasis on bloodlines and hierarchies of power, and grimdark does really critique that and undermine that. The kind of, I mean, again, the sort of the classic in What Happens is Robb Stark, who were presented in the beginning of A Song of Ice and Fire as this kind of, he is this young heroic king, and he's going to revenge his father's death, and obviously he's the hero. And then essentially you want to point out, because he's so determined, not because he's because he feels he has to do the right thing, and in the books obviously he has to do the right thing, and by marrying this girl that he doesn't really, we get the feeling he has no real feelings for, but he had sex with, so therefore he feels he has to marry. And of course in the television series is even more, he marries for love because he can't bear, he's a good 21st century man, he can't bear the idea of an arranged marriage, he marries us for love. And that causes how many people had to die because he couldn't just put up and marry the woman that it had been arranged to marry to sort everything out. And that kind of pointing those things out, grimdark is in some ways a very radical act in pointing these things out, and also giving a kind of, there is finding most grimdark books don't actually have, yes, it's bleak and nihilistic, but there are moments. So my friend Michael R. Fletcher's first book, Beyond Redemption, which is incredibly grimdark, and there's he made his editor vomit in one passage, one section of it. But it has this lovely scene where you have these two characters, and they are the characters are basically literally beyond redemption. They are really appalling people in an appalling world. But there's this lovely scene where you have these this man and woman who've known, they've been friends for years, and there's always been that thing between them, and and they do finally have drunken sex in a pub alley. But it's this wonderful kind of moment of two people just being together and just kind of finding a moment of happiness in a really bitter, unpleasant world.
Yes.
But there's this moment where you're really rooting for them, because they're not, you're not like, okay, so they're going to settle down, get married, have children, it's all going to be wonderful, because but they have this one moment of really kind of, and it's literally they're having drunken sex in an alley behind a cheap pub. It's not beautiful, it's not glamorous, but it's just very human, and there's that kind of human emphasis that kind of, it's not the sort of high fantasy, it's just very kind of dirty human reality. So that, I think grimdark is, I think there's a lot, the sort of the cynicism and the nihilism, I think, is important to, I mean, I think cynicism about Trump is telling a kind of high fantasy narrative. Fact is what he's doing. He's creating a kind of, he's creating,
in his head he is Aragorn, God help him.
Yes, in his head he is Aragorn. Yes.
When he's actually like kind of, is it Denethor? Gondor eating his children, as it were.
But, I mean, literally, yes, to Trump and his supporters, he is essentially the kind of gleaming fantasy destined hero, and to have for grimdark cynicism and ripping into that and making you pointing out, maybe you ought to ask questions, maybe you ought to start asking about what's the actual cost of this, why are we actually following this guy, what's he actually, is more important than it's ever been.
Interesting. And I find myself these days, in the midst of the nightmare that we live in, going back to film noir quite a lot, and the arts that was being produced in the 1940s, some fantastic kind of work, like The Third Man, for instance, but then obviously you do have films like Brief Encounter, which seem maybe highly romantic now, but fleeting moments of happiness against a backdrop of war, and I'm really interested in how people coped back then, often by finding solace in film, which was hugely popular then, and in pulp novels, you know, and in the music as well. Um, and like it's really interesting looking at the art from that period and how people coped against the nightmare of World War II, and I think we do need consoling fictions in any shape or form, but also the narratives that encourage us to challenge, to question, to critique, to deconstruct, as long as we can offer maybe ultimately something better. I mean, the act of art is an act of hope in itself. The act of reading, an act of hope. Margaret Atwood said that uh, writing a novel is a kind of act of hope, a kind of message in a bottle for the future, because it presumes a future reader, a world in which they're still reading. you know, so that's a hopeful act. You know, where it's still possible to get books. And they're not burnt or banned or whatever. And so yeah, as a writer and as an educator, I believe in those acts. So it's all good. Anything that encourages reading, I think, has got to be good. Anything that encourages imagination and questioning of power structures, definitely. Okay, let's just move on a bit and step back from the kind of granularity of your story worlds to like the act of creating those worlds. So how do you research your novels? Do you take an experiential approach, for example, with sword fighting? I just imagine you with a sword for some reason, I don't know why. Or do you consult with relevant experts? Ruin my fantasy, go on.
Okay, so yeah, I'm dyspraxic. Dyspraxia is not at all as known as dyslexia or autism. Dyspraxia. So if you go into a bookshop and you look at books on sort of neurodiversity and things, you'll get books on dyslexia, and they're often called things like dyslexia, the chaotic creativity, or kind of, I have seen a book called Dyslexia, the gift of creativity, and autism. People always say autism, the hidden superpower. If you the book on dyspraxia is Dyspraxia, the hidden handicap. It's often also known as bullied child syndrome, because it basically it means I have fairly poor muscle control. I'm not very coordinated, and so I don't really know. Like I will regularly pick up a fork and pass it from hand to hand, trying to remember which hand I eat with, because bizarrely, one of the other reasons I wear heels is because if I'm running around in flat shoes, I just fall over all the time. So if I'm wearing heels, so much of my brain is concentrating on walking, because if I'd stop concentrating on walking, I just tend to start falling over. So I was always terrible at PE. I was the last person picked. I was that kid in the playground who flapped, and
I think I was too.
yes, but so I've done quite a few panels on writing fighting, and there's usually me, and then there's usually someone who says things like, oh yes, of course, I've been doing reenactment for like 20 years now, and kind of, I have my broadsword and I have my whole plate armor every weekend. And you get someone else who says, oh, of course, I was in the RAF for 10 years. And then you get someone who says, oh, well, I have a black belt in jiu-jitsu. And then you get me, and I'm like, yeah, I can't remember which hand I hold. And there's this kind of I do not research my novels by actually fighting. I have been to reenactment events and I've held swords and things, because I'm like, but then of course I'm like, fuck, it's heavy. And then but then of course you can't, that is not the experience of someone who's been training with a sword for I've held swords, I've tried on helmets and things, but obviously that's coming from the perspective of someone who can barely hold a fork. But no, I make it up. I mean, I do read it. So I read a lot of history. My kind of comfort reading is military history. So I read a lot of military history. I read a lot of archaeology. And I read a lot of what I'm really, really interested in is reading things like first-person accounts of battles or war reporting. So things like Tolstoy's Sebastopol sketches. Now, obviously, Tolstoy was not fighting in the Crimean War, but he's writing, and he's writing. He is an observer in Sebastopol, writing this. I go back to these books that are direct experiences of war.
Mm.
So, or what's his name's Life and Fate.
Mm.
That, you know, books that have been written by people who are experienced, have lived through this, and sort of all first sort of some really interesting books and get that are sort of accounts of taken from diaries and letters and things of wars.
Mm.
So I
So
read those
primary
a lot.
source material, basically.
Primary source material, and yeah, and military history I read a lot. I do read a lot of sort of archaeology and looking at, so because obviously you're looking at the remains of people's lives. So a lot of sort of stuff for our British archaeology, which is obviously often sort of increasingly is about excavating just a normal people's houses. So again, it's looking at the people's lived reality, daily life. So I do a lot of kind of, and I go to reenactment events to kind of get a sense of the smells and the kind of textures, and but so I guess in some, but that's not for research in quite that way. It's just what I just kind of, it's my, I have somewhat one-track life, which is based around immersing myself in sort of historical and fantasy realities. So kind of, I'm not particularly interested in, I go to the British Museum a lot, I go to the Fitzwilliam Museum a lot. I'm not particularly interested in going to the Science Museum or the Natural History Museum, that kind of, I mean, yeah, and that, so I suppose I just have quite a one-track life.
That's great.
But yeah, it's kind of, it's not sort of so much research as just living it. I mean, I will try and tailor what I'm reading and doing to the kind of, at the moment, so when I'm writing the Sword of Bronze and Ashes series, The Making of This World Ruined, that's very influenced, that's sort of heavily influenced by Celtic mythology, and it's set in a kind of, it's kind of set in a mashup. It's a Bronze Age world, but it's also obviously a world of kind of, it's the archaeology is set in the Bronze Age in Britain. It's Britain in the Bronze Age and also in the kind of post-Roman period. So that's the kind of archaeology and history and literature I will try and read. But then, so when I was writing Empires of Dust, that was more classical. So I try and make sure I was reading more sort of about Alexander, about the Iliad. So I try and slightly shape when I'm reading and writing, reading and experiencing. I'll be more likely to go to the British Museum at the moment. I'll definitely go and have a look around the Sutton Hoo galleries. And I live we live about an hour's drive from Sutton Hoo, so that's where I go quite a lot at the moment.
Nice.
Whereas if I'm stuff that the secret project that I'm thinking about at the moment is set in a slightly different time period, so I'll definitely be more likely to go somewhere else to look at things that are set in that kind of period. So it's but it's kind of living it rather than but things like fighting, I mean, yeah, people often say things like, oh, you need to know what you're doing when you're writing fighting, and I sort of feel like, well, you really don't, because I mean, you know, if you do HEMA, if you do reenactments, if you do jiu-jitsu, you're not actually fighting. You know, come back to me when you've had to do your belt and jiu-jitsu, and the person you're fighting is literally actually trying to kill you, and not only kill you, but then they're going to burn your house down, rape several members of your family, and drag your kids off as slaves. You know, kind of, when you've experienced that in your jiu-jitsu classes, come and tell me what the experience is like, because you know, very few of us, you may have experienced being in a fight, but you've certainly not experienced kind of, yeah, this dragon is going to kill me, eats me, burn my village, and eat everyone I've ever loved.
Yeah, that's why I think it's effective to go to these kind of first-hand accounts of actual war, you know, and trauma. Yeah, to get a sense of what that actually must be like to be in Armageddon. Not some sort of play acting version of it. Have you written a scene that has been particularly thrilling to write, where you get, you know, palpitations, whatever, sweats, you know, just writing it? Do you get an adrenaline rush when you're writing fight scenes, battle scenes? Is there one that stands out for you?
Yes, it's really funny because I mean, I'm a radical feminist pacifist. I'm a communitarian radical feminist pacifist. And I always say to people, oh, you know, I'm writing violence and grimdark to show the horrors of it, and you know, but I mean, God, you know, there is nothing more enjoyable than writing a really massive fight scene. It is that kind of, and there, you know, watching a really massive fight scene is absolutely incredible. You know, I could watch them deep every day forever. I've seen that so many times. The Battle of Endor at the end of Return of the Jedi. You know, these. I could watch that every day forever. Because it's, you know, tearing me apart because it's so agonising. Also, just because it's just so cool. And yeah, writing fight scenes, I have this really complicated. On the one hand, yeah, right, I'm writing it to show how awful it is, and there is that. You know, if it, I want to move myself with the kind of horror of it. On the other, I'm also writing it because it's really, really enjoyable, and it's absolutely, because you are just like, rah! And I mean, you know, it's always, battle poetry has always been like that. The Iliad, people always, you know, the Iliad has some incredibly graphic descriptions of war and death, and it does not shy away from how awful and horrifying it is. But it's certainly not an anti-war poem. You know, sort of, if you look at very early British, so Empires of Dust, I kind of riff on the poet. I've got a couple of poems which are based on the Godothan, which is a series of poems. They're eulogies for fallen warriors. It's very, very early British literature, from the sort of written in the Old North and the kind of Welsh / British part of the north of what's now England. They're endless eulogies for warriors who died in battle. There's a kind of refrain. They're 300 marched out. I alone came back. But again, you know, they're absolutely confronting the fact that most of these people, you know, these are young men. These are men in their absolute prime, men who should have been settling down, getting married, having children, and they're all dead. And there's a real sense of horror and waste and pity, but there's also a real sense of, and there's, you know, and they were warriors and they fought, and that's just the best thing. And it's that tension is there in war poetry for forever. And it's kind of, and I think it would be totally disingenuous to say it's not that kind of excitement. I mean, people have always been fighting. You kind of, you know, there's evidence of battles and massacres go back. I think this sort of fantasy that people in the past, there's this sort of bizarre fantasy of people, particularly in the Neolithic, it was all terribly nice. And actually the Neolithic was awful, because clearly that was the period when they invented hierarchy and this is all mine and you lot work for me, because as soon as you have the idea of this land, this field is my field and I'm going to keep on all the products of this field. I mean, as soon as you have food you can keep like that, because you can dry the grain and keep it, like, this is mine and you lot are going to starve unless you do what I say. The Neolithic was awful. But yeah, I mean, we've got evidence of battles and massacres going back to the Neolithic now. Anyone who kind of says, oh, war, you know, war has been an absolute constant in human history for forever. Which kind of suggests there's a reason people do it. I mean, you know, kind of
it's worth understanding, isn't it? And
yeah, you know, sort of medieval society was the entire sort of these families who were organizing all their power and status around military power. You know, your power and your status, and you know, you're buying war horses that cost more than your tenants' houses. You're probably not investing in having a society. Yes, you can say the society is kind of running out of control and individuals are trapped within it, but at the same time, people at the top, you know, if it was all that awful, they could probably have changed the way they were living and done something else, and they don't. You know, it's all as soon as you have power, as soon as people who are in a position of power, they're spending a huge amount of their money on weaponry and arms, which suggests that people enjoy doing that.
But it's certainly quite enjoyable to read about stuff like that. I'm aware, yeah, I've been keeping you for quite a while now. I want to skip ahead just to the last couple of questions. Is there somebody that you would love to collaborate with? Like, what would be your dream collaboration? You know, this could be somebody who's not even around anymore, but in your head, this would be the ideal collaboration. It could be any kind of creative filmmaker, writer, artist, musician? Who would you like to hang out
Oh,
with and create with?
I did collaborate with I co-wrote a novel with my friend Michael
Oh,
Fletcher, and that was actually brilliant. That was an absolute dream. It's In the
nice.
Shadow of Their Dying, a novella that the two of us collaborated on, and that was a dream. I mean, I love Fletcher's writing. We get on really well as people, and we just clicked, and we wrote something and I just felt completely. That was also commissioned by Grimdark magazine, so it was, it wasn't like it. We would write. It was completely free. It had already all been kind of arranged and paid for, as it were. It wasn't like, is someone going to like this? And it was for Grimdark magazine, so it was a kind of sense of, it's not. This can definitely not be. This doesn't need to be a kind of beginner person, someone who's never read fantasy before. This is a novel for people who knew the genre. So the two of us could just go and just completely push it without any sense of, but what if the finance people are going to be worried, or or maybe I'll just tone it down. We could just go, and that was absolutely superb. So in some ways, I've already had my dream collaboration, but
Nice.
a realistic dream collaboration, because that was just wonderful. But if I could have worked with anyone in the universe, so I'd actually love to see. I'd love to see a really good musical setting of some of my stuff. So I mean, I've read my work. I perform my writing, and it's partly written with a sense of how it would sound. As you may have gathered, I grew up listening to a lot of oral poetry and sort of, a lot of classic texts that were written to be performed or composed to be performed. So, so I'd love to do, like, read my book with Tony Wakeford, who is the genius behind a band called Soul Invictus, which is a very, very strange experimental folk, very dark folk. I would just love to see a kind of, me performing with Soul Invictus doing the music, because that would. I mean, I wrote the whole of that Empires of Dust listening, and a lot of Woman of the Sword and Sword, Bronze and Ashes listening to Soul Invictus CDs. So I'd love to see that. I'd love that, but also, yes, and I have sort of said to people, I would have loved to see David Lynch do Empires of Dust in the style of Dune. I love his Dune. His Dune is just, because people always say my books are really cinematic and they'd make really good television. So I'm like, no, they wouldn't, because I've given you a massive description of someone sitting on a horse looking out over the landscape, and it's all about their feelings. And then we're actually doing, when they look at a tree, they're not seeing a tree, we've got this whole massive stuff about their internal feelings, and it's all the language describing the tree. So what they would actually translate to in film is a really, really long shot of a chap sitting on a horse looking at a tree, which would be really boring.
These were like David Lean's one, the big canvas.
But Lynch could do it, because he just, and obviously, I just have said, just do whatever, change it, totally change it, the way he did with Jude. I don't, just do it. And that, I'd have loved it. Yeah, if I could, yes. Lynch or Fellini,
nice. The fantasy community is a lively and diverse one. Can you give us an anecdote from a fantasy con or other convention which highlights this?
Oh God. Not really.
No,
I mean, I love going to conventions. I love how I sort of describe things, like I describe fantasy con, and it's like sometimes it's like going on holiday with all your best friends. It's I mean, good conventions. Some conventions are quite academic, and it's like, this is like the best master seminar.
Rosen, I think. So
Talking about it. And then there are other times it's just the most immense amount of fun. It is like a country house. It's like a sort of country house weekend, or a wedding, big family wedding, just with and it's just so much fun.
Sounds brilliant. I hope to join you at one of those at some point. So, okay, a wildcard question. You have to form a superhero team of science fiction fantasy authors to save the planet. Who would you pick, and what would be their superpowers?
Oh my God.
2 or 3 people.
Okay, actually, Anna Stevens, author of the Godblind trilogy, because I think Anna's just amazing. She's just, and people get us confused all the time, which is really embarrassing. People cannot cope with the idea there are two women writing fairly violent fantasy, both called Anna. But she's just, I mean, she just lives like her books. She's just like, she'd be up front, and she'd be like, we're just going to fucking charge him, and she would, and she'd win. I think, who else? Oh God, I can't really think of anyone else. But Anna Stevens.
I'd like to see a buddy sort of movie with you and Anna Stevens, kicking ass together. That'd be great.
There's the whole joke anyway, because I mean, we regularly get sent. Both of us regularly get sent really long messages from something. Someone DMs us with this message like, Anna, your book is the best book I've ever read. God, I loved it. It's just astonishing. It's changed my life. And you get right down to the end of this message thinking, and you realise they meant the other one. And both of us have been through this so many times. We've been tagged to each other's book reviews. And it's just, oh God, we're both just so used to ending up with a little, I think you find you'll mean the other Anna.
Oh God. You can make something of that in a movie where you kind of like switch identities or something.
Yes,
like face off or
yes,
something like that.
Yes, it would be really funny actually. Yeah, the two of us actually, just because, and I mean, we both kind of got, we're both white women of around the same age with dark hair. We don't dress in any way the same, we don't look remotely the same, but kind of, we're not totally dissimilar either. And yeah, so it is quite funny because people do, but it is really quite funny. So yeah, the two of us as some kind of bizarre kind of crime fighting duo, Anna and Anna.
Oh, yeah, I'll watch that definitely. I want to see it on Netflix. So obviously this won't come out till the summer. So bearing that in mind, have you got anything exciting coming up in terms of readings, other events or projects like in the second half of the year?
So yeah, my the sequel to A Sword of Bronze and Ashes, and I might even be able to tell you the title by the time it comes out. For some reason, the title has been kept a deep secret. I think we're going to do a big cover and title reveal at some point. But book 2 of The Making of This World Ruined, the sequel to A Sword of Bronze and Ashes, is being launched at World Fantasy Con for Halloween, and that is darker and stranger than A Sword of Bronze and Ashes. It's continuing Candace's story. It's darker and stranger, and again very kind of influenced by Celtic mythology and folklore. There's a lot of folk horror in it, and
that's great.
I'm really, really looking forward to that. I'm really, really pleased with it. I'm slightly scared because it is a very strange book. I think it's my strangest book that I've ever written. But it's kind of, it's almost kind of telling, it's like the kind of classic children's fantasy where a lot of it you can see as the child's projections. If you think about things like Labyrinth and Time Bandits, the world that the protagonist is living in is clearly, you can see it's built on their subconscious. So the end of Time Bandits, you realise that everything in that world is the contents of Kevin's bedroom. And Labyrinth as well, of course, it is all her fantasy. It is everything in Labyrinth is stuff from her bedroom. It's all her soft toys and things. So it's telling that story of going into the fantasy world, which is the child's subconscious, from the perspective of the adult who can see that. So it's very strange. It's kind of trying to do almost sort of do a psycho. And there's loads of folklore in it as well.
Look forward to at World Fantasy Con. So thank you. So a final word of advice to aspiring authors of science fiction, fantasy, weird and horror. Anything you would recommend or suggest?
Just keep writing and write for yourself. So I sometimes see posts on sort of readers and writers groups on Facebook with people saying things like, which should I write it? Which is more likely to sell, first person or third person? Or kind of, would it be better to write a multi-point of view novel or a single point of view novel? And that kind of, just write completely what you want to write, write because you love it. And I mean, yeah, you might get you might write some incredible bestseller, or you might self-publish it, but whatever, someone somewhere, even if if you write it and stick it out for free on Wattpad, someone somewhere will love it and come back to you and saying, this is, I thought this was the funniest or the most moving, or I just really enjoyed it. And that's all you can ask for. Yeah, you can try and talk about metrics of, is it more likely to get published and sold if it's third person or first person? Well, I mean, just because people were buying lots of first person books last year doesn't that might, causation is not correlation. Correlation is not causation. It doesn't mean it's actually Harry Potter's book written in the third person. That does not mean that you're more likely to become sell as many copies as Harry Potter if you written in the third person. But also just write for your enjoyment, and someone will love it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with self-publishing. I don't think there's anything wrong with putting stuff on Wattpad, because you're getting it out there, and someone will read it, and someone will do it, and that kind of, obviously, it's nice. It would be nice. I'd love to be able to have the money to be able to stop working and live in a huge house. Don't have children is part of it. Well, it's a bit late for me.
Yeah. Oh, well, Anna, thank you so much. You've been very generous with your time. Where this is like doubled in length to what I was expected to be, but I think, it's been such an interesting conversation. I've really enjoyed it. And hopefully our readers will too. Obviously, I'll transcribe this and create an edited version, but loads of fantastic content here. I mean, an embarrassing riches in many ways, and it's been absolutely fantastic to talk with you. So I'll let you go now. Thank you for your time, and
yes,
hope to see you
be able
again.
to send you the cover image and the title for the new book.
That'd be great.
By the time this comes out.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And do sign up for World Fantasy Con, and because it would be really good to do a panel. I mean, what you're saying about, it was funny because the panel I did at BristolCon about fantasy and literature. So one of the other people on it was Joanne Harris, and it turned out Joanne Harris considers herself a literary author. What she meant by literature was realist novels. So she considers, and I had to actually restrain myself from saying, I'm sorry, I thought we were talking about literature here. Because I wanted to talk about, modern postmodernist poetry, and what is Ulysses if not fantasy? Ulysses is trying to, I wanted to, and and Bulgakov and people, and she wanted to talk about Sally Bloody Rooney. To actually talk about like actual, fantasy, writing fantasy and science fiction is trying to write about the sublime, and it's trying to write about something which cannot be described. It's the Lovecraftian attempting to use language to describe that which cannot be articulated in language, which is what Ulysses is fucking doing. It's what Eliot's doing. It's kind of, and I do not want to talk about, well, why is Chocolat considered, why is Sally Rooney considered to be more acceptable to read on the train?
And also, you could argue that, the modes of fantastica, science fiction, fantasy, and all the rest, actually are more accurate descriptions of the nuances of reality, the multi-dimensional nature of reality. What's been called speculative realism. It's like, the world is a weird and wonderful place and horrific place, and I think maybe our forms of writing capture that perhaps better than so-called realism.
Yes. So that would be a really cool thing to talk about at World Fantasy Con.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yes.
Anyway, it's been lovely to talk to you.
Yes.
I'll be in touch, but take care for now.
Yes, thanks. Bye.
Bye.